Welcome to Heroic Mission, where we uncover powerful stories that don't just entertain but awaken something deep within us. In a world full of noise, we shine a light on the quiet acts of courage, compassion, and unshakable belief. Today's story isn't just about a celebrity moment. It's about faith under fire, dignity in silence, and the ripple effect of one man's grace in the face of mockery. What happened on that stage shocked millions, not with drama, but with truth. Stay with us, because this one might just change how you see everything. The lights were blinding, the laughter loud, and the tension unmistakable. In the heart of a buzzing television studio in Chicago, Cassandra Blake, known for her razor-sharp wit and unapologetic atheism, grinned at the cameras. This wasn't just another interview, it was meant to be a spectacle. Her target? Keanu Reeves, a man she mockingly introduced as Hollywood's silent monk. The audience erupted in laughter as Cassandra leaned in with a smirk and asked, "You, Keanu? Do you honestly believe there's someone up there watching you after everything you've been through?" It was the kind of moment designed to humiliate. But Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't fire back. He simply reached up and held the small cross resting on his chest, his fingers calm, his eyes even calmer. He didn't need to argue. In that instant, his silence said everything. In a world that often demands quick comebacks and louder voices, Keanu chose reverence. The studio lights sparkled off his necklace, a quiet symbol of something deeper, something the room wasn't ready to understand just yet. This wasn't going to be the story Cassandra thought she was writing. It was the beginning of something else, something far more human. From the moment Keanu stepped onto the stage, something felt different. He wasn't there to promote a film or win a debate. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that didn't fit the show's usual rhythm. Wearing a simple black blazer and jeans, his most striking accessory was the small cross around his neck, resting gently over his heart. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't for show. It was personal. As Cassandra fired off her biting remarks, the audience roared with laughter, waiting for the Hollywood star to crack or clap back. But Keanu remained still, composed, grounded. His silence wasn't awkward. It was powerful. Every pause he took, every moment he chose not to speak, filled the room with something far more profound than words. Then came the question that changed everything. Cassandra, voice dripping with sarcasm, asked, "Do you really think someone's watching over you?" The room braced for controversy, but Keanu simply looked down, touched the cross, and said quietly, "If I'm still standing after everything, it wasn't just luck." The laughter stopped. And for the first time that night, a room trained to entertain felt something it didn't expect. Reverence. This wasn't performance, it was truth. What happened next couldn't be scripted. Cassandra, still determined to steer the conversation back to sarcasm, leaned in again, mocking religion with rehearsed lines and exaggerated Bible verses. "The meek shall inherit the earth? Good luck with that in LA," she quipped, earning nervous laughter. But something had shifted. The rhythm of the room had changed. The laughter felt thinner. The applause didn't hit the same. It wasn't just Keanu's silence that echoed. It was what it represented. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't get defensive. He didn't try to prove a point. He just sat there, fingers resting gently on the cross, as if anchoring himself to something deeper than the moment. And in that stillness, people began to feel it too. A quiet montage rolled across the screen. No movie clips, no red carpets, just real moments from Keanu's life. A small white casket, a hospital hallway, a lonely subway ride. There was no narration needed. Loss, grief, solitude, but somehow, grace too. This wasn't a man using faith as a shield. This was a man whose pain had shaped his belief, not shattered it. A man who didn't need to speak loudly, because his life already had. And slowly, those watching, both in the studio and across America, began to understand. This wasn't about religion. This was about dignity in pain, hope after loss, and the quiet power of holding on when the world gives you every reason to let go. As the conversation unfolded, Cassandra pushed harder, her tone sharpened with frustration. and her smile, once confident, now carried a hint of desperation. "You're really not going to say anything?" she asked, almost accusingly. "Do you seriously believe there's someone out there looking out for you?" This time Keanu looked at her. Truly looked. There was no defiance in his gaze, only depth. Then, with a voice steady and soft, he said, "If I'm still here, if I'm still standing after everything, it wasn't just luck." The studio froze. In a world obsessed with reactions, with comebacks and clapbacks, Keanu chose a path few walk anymore: grace under fire. He didn't argue. He didn't explain himself. He simply told the truth and let it breathe. And something in Cassandra cracked. The crowd, once primed for laughter, now sat in sacred stillness. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, zooming in gently, almost reverently, on the cross at Keanu's chest. It no longer looked like an accessory. It looked like a lifeline. Then Cassandra spoke again, but something had changed. Her voice trembled. The armor of sarcasm fell away. "When I was a kid," she said, eyes glossing over, "I used to pray every night, just to feel normal." The studio wasn't a stage anymore. It had become a confessional. Keanu didn't move, didn't interrupt. He simply held space. And in that space, something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, raw and rare. In that moment, millions didn't see a Hollywood actor and a talk show host. They saw two souls, wounded, searching, human, meeting in a place beyond debate. Not in argument, but in truth. Cassandra's voice faltered, her eyes downcast as she confessed the prayers of her childhood, nights spent pleading with a God she wasn't sure existed, asking only to feel normal, to not be afraid, to be enough. Her words weren't sarcastic now. They were shaky, vulnerable, stripped of performance. For the first time, she wasn't playing a role. She was revealing a wound. The studio, once buzzing with applause and mockery, had transformed into something holy. Not in a religious sense, but in the way a moment becomes sacred when someone speaks a truth they've hidden their entire life. Keanu didn't try to fix her pain. He didn't reach for the perfect response. He simply leaned in and said softly, "No one who suffers while praying is ever truly alone. Someone always hears, even if you didn't realize it." It wasn't a line, it wasn't meant to impress, it was real, something lived, not rehearsed, and it landed not like a revelation, but like a quiet miracle. A woman in the front row wiped away tears. Another held her breath. Cassandra blinked slowly, the armor she'd worn her whole career falling away piece by piece. "I used to think silence meant no one was listening," she whispered. "But maybe I just didn't know how to listen back." And just like that, the room changed again. Not because a debate was won or a belief was proven, but because two people, one who had held faith in silence and one who had mocked it out of pain, met at the intersection of truth and grace. In a world that often rewards noise, their quiet exchange spoke louder than any argument ever could. It reminded people watching across America and around the world that faith isn't about having all the answers. Sometimes it's about being still enough to ask the right questions. Sometimes it's about showing up with your wounds and realizing someone else is carrying theirs too. And in that moment, nobody cared who was right. They just knew they weren't alone. What the audience didn't know was that behind the lights, beyond the scripted questions, something much deeper had been set in motion. While Cassandra's emotional reveal captured the public's attention, the truth about that night was still unfolding. Just hours after the show aired, a video surfaced online, recorded secretly backstage. At first, it sounded like casual production chatter, but then a voice clearly said, "We want the God stuff pushed. She needs to poke him, get a reaction. That's what drives the clips." Another replied, "He won't fight back. That's why it works." The internet exploded. What many thought was an authentic conversation had in part been a setup, a deliberate attempt to bait Keanu into a viral meltdown. But the plan had backfired, not because he fought back, but because he didn't. His stillness, his restraint, his refusal to turn faith into performance, that's what broke the script. The hashtag #RespectFaith began trending within hours. People from every walk of life, religious, spiritual, agnostic, joined the conversation. Not to argue about theology, but to defend something deeper, the right to believe, quietly and without shame. Stories poured in. A nurse shared how Keanu had once sat silently beside her dying mother. No cameras, no name-dropping, just presence. A rideshare driver told of a $500 0-cents tip and the simple words, "You were kind. The world needs more of that." A woman recalled sobbing on a sidewalk and Keanu sitting beside her without asking why, just listening. He hadn't needed to preach. His life spoke for him. And in an age where performance often replaces truth, his sincerity struck a chord people didn't know they were missing. News anchors, psychologists, pastors, and podcasters all weighed in not on his religion, but on his integrity, his presence, his radical gentleness. Keanu didn't release a statement, no interviews, no rebuttals, just one image, a weathered wooden table, a closed book, and his cross resting on top. No caption, because the moment had already said everything. In the days that followed, the silence from Keanu only made the moment louder. While social media churned, while news cycles debated what had happened, he said nothing. No clarifying post, no reactive soundbite. Just that one still image, his cross on a closed book, and the world filled in the rest. But then, something unexpected happened. The network, sensing a cultural shift they hadn't predicted, announced a second live appearance. No flashy taglines this time, no sarcasm, just one simple promise. A conversation that moved the world. On the night of the broadcast, the studio was packed, not with fans seeking entertainment, but with people hungry for something real. This time, Keanu entered quietly as he always did. Cassandra, visibly different, less host, more human, greeted him with a soft, "Thanks for coming back." But just as the first question hovered in the air, the studio lights flickered. And then everything stopped. The microphones cut out. The screens glitched. A hush fell so heavy it felt like time itself paused. 10 seconds of complete, sacred stillness. No hum of equipment, no audience whispers, just silence. And in that silence, Keanu sat unmoved, hands resting lightly in his lap, the cross visible beneath the glow of emergency lights. It wasn't a tech failure, it was a moment. When the lights returned and sound came back on, no one laughed. Cassandra turned to him, her voice trembling. "I don't know what that was." Keanu simply said, "It wasn't about winning a debate, it was about touching a soul." No applause followed, just reverence. Across the country, people watched those 10 seconds over and over, not to understand what had happened, but to feel it again, to remember what silence used to mean. In a world saturated by noise, that stillness said more than any monologue ever could. And as the broadcast ended, one message began to rise above the rest. Faith doesn't need to shout to be heard. That 10 seconds of silence became the most watched moment in the show's history, not because of what was said, but because of what was felt. Podcasts, news anchors, and even comedians paused to reflect on it. Analysts slowed the footage frame by frame, searching for an explanation. Some called it a glitch, a tech failure, but for millions of people it was something more. It was a reset. Keanu never offered an explanation. No interviews, no corrections, just presence, and one more quiet gesture. A photo of a single candle burning beside a folded note that read, "You were heard." The host, Cassandra, took a step back from the show. No press release, no controversy, just a simple post to her followers. "Some conversations are more important than content. Thank you, Keanu." And instead of judgment, something rare happened, grace. The internet didn't cancel her, it embraced her. People saw something universal in her breakdown. Not weakness, not hypocrisy, but truth. The kind of truth that lives under our skin, the kind we try to laugh off until it won't be laughed off anymore. The moment sparked something bigger. The hashtag #MyFaithIsNotAfault surged across platforms. Not as protest, but as testimony. People of all ages, backgrounds, and beliefs began sharing their stories. "I stopped wearing my necklace after someone mocked me. I just put it back on." My mom used to pray for me. I used to roll my eyes. Today I thanked her. I've never believed in anything, but maybe I can start believing in peace. From churches in Georgia to meditation circles in California, from veterans to teenagers, people weren't just defending belief, they were reclaiming it. And through it all, Keanu remained silent, letting the wave move without directing it. He didn't need to lead a movement. He had simply lived a truth so gently, so consistently, that it made space for others to rediscover their own. In a world that rewards volume, he chose reverence. And that choice, quiet, intentional, sacred, became the spark for something no one could predict, but everyone could feel. In a world addicted to attention, Keanu Reeves did the unthinkable. He stayed quiet. No viral speech, no grand explanation, no effort to own the moment. Instead, he did what he always seemed to do best. He let the silence speak. And somehow that silence traveled farther than any shout ever could. Churches, classrooms, living rooms, and comment sections lit up with stories, not of doctrine but of humanity. A young woman wrote, "I used to be ashamed to talk about my faith in college. Now, I wear my grandmother's cross again." A father in Ohio said, "My daughter asked me what grace means. I showed her that clip." In Texas, a group of veterans held a moment of silence, not for war, but for peace. One man whispered, "That's what strength looks like." And through it all, Keanu never claimed to be a hero. He didn't use the moment to launch a cause or build a brand. He didn't need to. He had already given the world something rarer. An example. The stillness of those 10 seconds, the weight of his quiet words, the compassion in his presence. Those things lingered, not as trends, but as truths. And slowly people began to remember that belief in its purest form isn't always loud or performative. Sometimes it's as simple as showing up, as listening, as holding space when someone else breaks open. The host, Cassandra, said later in an interview, "He didn't fight me, he didn't argue, he didn't even try to change my mind, but somehow I changed." And that was the miracle. Not the glitch, not the silence, but the transformation that took place in the hearts of those who witnessed it. In a time when everyone wants to be right, Keanu reminded us that being real is greater, that grace doesn't need a spotlight, and that sometimes the most powerful sermon comes not from a stage, but from a soul that refuses to stop believing. Quietly, steadily, beautifully, no matter what. As the final days of this story unfolded, something became clear. This was never just about Keanu Reeves. It wasn't about a talk show, a trending hashtag, or even a 10-second silence that captured the world's attention. It was about something deeper, something many of us had forgotten how to name. It was about presence, about grace, about the sacred power of just being real. Keanu never tried to become the center of the conversation, and maybe that's exactly why he did. In a time when most people shout to be heard, he whispered, and the world leaned in. When the cameras faded and the lights dimmed, he didn't launch a campaign or give a victory speech. Instead, he shared a final image, himself, walking alone through a quiet park, the sun low in the sky, his cross resting gently against his chest. No words, no caption, but everyone understood. Because by then, people had already begun living differently. Teenagers sat in silence, not scrolling but reflecting. Families talked at the dinner table about what they believed. A child in a hospital whispered, "That's what calm looks like." People from every walk of life began reclaiming something personal. Not religion, not a system, but the right to believe in something good. And the host? She wasn't canceled. She wasn't humiliated. She was changed. Her final message to her viewers wasn't dramatic, just honest. "Maybe God did speak to me that night. I just finally stopped laughing long enough to listen." That's what this story became. Not a battle of faith versus doubt, but a journey from noise to stillness, from performance to authenticity. And in that quiet space, something powerful happened. People felt seen, heard, remembered. So if you're reading this, or watching it, and you've been holding back your voice, your hope, or your faith because the world told you it didn't matter, let this be your reminder. Faith isn't weakness, silence isn't empty, and you are not alone. So here we are, at the end of a story that never asked to go viral but did. Not because it was loud or shocking, but because it was honest. A story about faith that didn't preach, and a man who didn't try to win, but still touched millions. In a world constantly chasing attention, Keanu Reeves reminded us that the most powerful moments are often the quietest ones. Moments where we stop trying to prove ourselves and simply be human. That night on live television, something rare happened. A hardened host softened. An audience fell silent, and millions watching from living rooms, hospital beds, subway stations, and sleepless bedrooms felt something they hadn't in a long time. Not entertainment, not outrage, but something like peace. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, made you feel something deep and real, you're not alone. And that's what Heroic Mission is all about. We don't chase the spotlight. We follow the quiet strength of those who choose kindness over conflict, presence over performance, and truth over applause. If you believe the world needs more of that, subscribe to this channel. Join a community that listens, that believes, and that holds space for stories that matter. Because sometimes the most heroic mission of all is just choosing to care. Maybe this story was never really about a talk show. Maybe it wasn't even about Keanu Reeves. Maybe it was about all of us. About what we've lost in the noise and what we're quietly longing to find again. Faith, presence, and a deeper kind of courage. Courage that doesn't yell to be heard. Faith that doesn't need applause. And strength that shows up not in the spotlight, but in the stillness. Keanu didn't try to change the world. He simply stood firm in what he believed. And somehow, that gave others permission to believe too. Not in the same things, but in something. In kindness, in meaning, in the idea that even in a fractured world, grace still matters. If this story touched your heart, if you felt something stir in the silence, don't let it fade. Here on Heroic Mission, we share stories that go beyond the noise, stories that inspire, that heal, that remind us what truly matters. So if you believe in the quiet power of truth, of compassion, of standing tall without shouting, subscribe now, because the world needs more of that. And maybe, just maybe, it starts with you.